climate environment for Mother Earth. The Loss and Damage Fund deal in Sharm el-Sheikh, therefore, is seen by some as a big step for the poor countries of the South, while others describe it as vague because the details for the framework for the generation and management of the fund are yet to be knocked out. There is also the question of who will benefit from the fund and what will be the parameters. On the other hand, will the fund embolden or discourage the rich countries from emitting more carbon? Now, outright pessimists argue that the fund will never see the light of the day and by implication will never deliver on its expected outcomes. They point at the unfulfilled promises made by rich countries at the 2009 Copenhagen Summit to provide about $100 billion climate financing to developing countries by 2020 to help slow climate change. They point at this as an example of what to expect from the latest deal, which is put at about $260 billion. Now, another outcome of COP27 was the failure to end the use of fossil fuels. Was this a positive for oil-producing developing nations or for the rich oil-producing countries like Russia, Saudi Arabia, and some countries in the Western world? What else could Africa and the developing world have harvested from COP27 that did not happen? What were the challenges, if any? Right, these are the issues we'll be focusing on this edition of the program. And joining me to look at this is Nnimmo Bassey. Nnimmo is a renowned environmental activist who attended the Sharm el-Sheikh Summit. Thank you so much, Nnimmo, for finding time to join us.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Very much.
We'll be back in a moment to continue our discussion.
Did you know that AIT's social media handles have all changed? If you are one of the millions of our followers on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, this is introducing to you AIT's new official and rebranded social media handles. Like or follow us now on our Facebook page, Official AIT Live. If you're on Twitter, switch to our new handle at Official AIT Live and activate the notification button to get breaking news and updates on the go. For exclusive short videos and photo news, follow our Instagram account at Official AIT Live. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Official AIT Live, and enjoy live streaming of news and your favorite programs, where you can also watch our broadcast materials at your own convenience. Note that Official AIT Live is the only authentic social media profile name with all the handles on our website ait.live, with a notification prompt to accept and receive breaking news and updates on the go. Log on to Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube platforms on your smartphone, tablet device, laptop, and desktop to follow us now. AIT.live. On air, online, online.
The truth untold. We restored democracy. We initiated due process. We created the EFCC and ICPC. We brought Nigeria out of debt by achieving $18 billion worth of relief and $30 billion overall reduction. We revived the rail system. We upgraded agriculture. We brought in the mobile phone and digitalized Nigeria. Under the PDP, the Nigerian economy was the strongest in Africa. Though Nigerians made their choice, today we all know better. Nigerians, do not despair. Hope is in the horizon. We are putting in the work and refreshing our drive to rescue and rebuild Nigeria. Together, Let's make it happen. PDP. Power to the people.
All right, thank you so much for staying with us. People, Politics and Power, we're focusing on the outcomes of the Sharm el-Sheikh COP27. And right here with me in the studio is Mr. Nnimmo Bassey, an environmental activist who was part of the conference in 2022. Thank you so much for finding time. Thank you so much. Yeah. Right. So, in Sharm el-Sheikh, there was a lot of give and take. There was a lot of negotiations. And at the end of the day, the conference had to be extended by a day or two. Now, what did that do for Africa?
Well, you know, to start with, before the conference started, COP27 was termed by some people as the African COP. Some of us knew that it wasn't an African COP because some people thought this was the first time the Conference of Parties was held in Africa. But this was actually the 5th time. So it was never an African COP, but in terms of it taking place in Africa, it wasn't an African COP in terms of African issues being paramount at the COP. And so some people went there with false hopes and false notions. But I think those who came out feeling a bit better were those who didn't have any high hopes from the COP, because over the years, as you well know, the COP has been marching at one spot or marching backwards. Because previously, rich nations had agreed to a binding requirement to cut emissions at certain levels. But right from COP15 in 2009, when the voluntary emissions regime came into play, we now have, especially consolidated in the Paris Agreement, that what is now called the NDCs, nationally determined contributions, that nations can cut emissions at any level that is convenient for them, hoping that they will consider the overall global situation. So we've seen throughout the year, especially from last year, just before Glasgow meeting, UNEP, United Nations Environment Programme, produced a report that showed that what countries said they were going to contribute was not going to help at all. And just before COP27 in Egypt, they issued another report known as the Emissions Gap Report that showed that the things that nations said they're going to do would have very negligible impact in terms of climate warming, the climate change. So in terms of changing and making things better for us. So the Africans had hoped that there would be real delivery in terms of finance and other assistance. And you know, when you look at that, sometimes it looks like Africa is always asking for help. But in this case, really, Africa would not be asking for help when they ask for more finance. They're asking for what is due Africa. Because the climate change itself is the result of activities of rich, industrialized, and polluting nations. So the question you're asking me is whether we came off better than we went in. And I think that's what really happened. Two things happened. You captured this very clearly in the introduction. Two things happened at the end of the COP. After the extension, when the COP was supposed to end on a Friday, and everyone saw that they were not near reaching an agreement, they had to sit up. Everybody had to sit up to make sure they don't come out there without anything, because every COP must come out with an agreement, with a paper, agreed by consensus, so to speak.
Now, so this adaptation fund, for instance, some people have described it as not an assistance to Africa, but reparations, climate reparations.
Well, there are two things that I implied in your question. Number one is the issue of adaptation. And you know, it's a very sad thing when you did not cause a problem and you are forced to be adapting to that problem. And the person causing the problem continues to cause the problem, and you are required to keep on adapting to that situation. It's clearly unjust, clearly unjust. So the thing to demand is they stop the pollution, stop releasing more carbon into the atmosphere, and manage what is already in the atmosphere by taking certain actions. these were some of the debates that went on. In fact, before the COP, at the beginning of the COP, there was a paper that was, a concept note that was circulated that tried to define one of the clauses in Article 6.4 of the Paris Agreement. And that was, what does it mean to remove carbon from the atmosphere? What is carbon removal? They had to define what does it really mean, how would it be done? And the paper suggested that it meant removal of carbon and storage in some long-term reservoirs, either on land or in the oceans. And that was very alarming, because if you were going to capture carbon, if it's possible,
if it's possible, yes,
in the quantity needed to affect the climate, to affect the temperatures, if you capture it and you store it in reservoirs, long-term reservoirs, what is the meaning of long-term? Does it mean 1,000 years? Does it mean 1 million years? If it means 1,000 years, do you have the permission of those who will be on planet Earth to keep that problem for them?
And what will happen?
What will happen at that time?
After that time,
So
yes.
this is an intergenerational booby trap being set by people who don't want to change the way they live and the way they produce and consume goods. So in terms of the Adaptation Fund actually shifted towards the loss and damage that was the major outcome of this COP, which many people applaud. Now, the idea of loss and damage is good.
Yeah, because I was going to come to that, because we need to understand what this loss and damage actually means.
Exactly.
It's a term that has been thrown around every day and everywhere now. What does it really mean?
Yeah, it's just that it's now the term is becoming prominent because it's now in the climate agreement. It's been, civil society has been arguing on this, and some negotiators from Africa have been, and the Global South have been pushing this for about 30 years now, that there should be a payment of climate, of loss and damage. But I think also that, okay, first of all, what does it mean?
What does it mean?
According to the agreement, what came out of Sharm el-Sheikh, it means the it's a kind of funds made available to take care of long-term or extensive impacts of climate change on certain territories. That's put in layman's term. That's where we could summarize that. But you see, this is something that is one step towards climate justice, but it's not yet climate justice, because the real climate justice would not be to define payment of loss and damage just to compensate or help take care of maybe excessive impact of climate change, like flooding that occurred in Nigeria, or drought in Somalia, or flooding cyclone in Madagascar, or flooding in Pakistan. That would not be sufficient. What some of us believe needs to be considered is the payment of a climate debt. A climate debt meaning debt being owed by those who have historically and currently have contributed to global warming by taking up the carbon, the space that carbon ought to be in the atmosphere at a level that is still conducive for human existence on planet Earth. And don't forget, we are talking about human existence, but we are not the only beings on Earth. There are other organisms and species that we share this planet with, and they also have a right to survive. Because if they don't survive, humans may not survive, because we are all interdependent. Now, the issue is, with this loss and damage, the biggest doubt is raised by rich countries who have said that they, of course, they've agreed to loss and damage. Is yet to be debated, as you mentioned, where the money will come from, who would be qualified to receive it, for what purpose, when, and all that. Now, they also said that even though they agreed to loss and damage, they don't have intention to equate this to admission of guilt, or admission of liability, or payment for reparation for climate harms, that they wouldn't accept that. That is very dangerous signal. And I think this is what our governments should take note of when they go to the next COP, or the intersessional, which will happen around June, maybe usually in Berlin, or in Bonn, Germany. So they should take this very carefully. If the issue of liability is removed from loss and damage, what is going to be the loss and damage is charity. And if it's charity, you can't really ask for an elevated amount to be given to you, because then a beggar, as they say, has very
has no choice. Yes, because that's the direction I was going to. The fact that the rich countries, the industrialized countries of the North, global North, that are the ones responsible for carbon emissions. Africa is said to just contribute less than 1% of carbon emissions globally. But of course, Africa and the developing countries are worse impacted by the effects of carbon emissions. So if the global North is refusing to accept liability for their actions and in effect pushing the global South to accept that, look, what we are going to give as loss and damage is actually out of our benevolence, out of mercy for the rest of the world. What should the global South then be doing?
It's a tough situation because in the multilateral space, everybody tries to be polite, and then they get beaten and they come back and nurse their wounds. But I think we got to a point where countries who are at the receiving end have to be very firm and demand that there should be a recognition that something is being owed. Something is being owed and something must be paid for. Because you can't push away what has been done in the past. Because it is what was done in the past that is responsible for what we're experiencing today. It's the carbon from the ton of industrial. This is why when they mention the temperature targets, they also tie it back to industrial level, industrial revolution. The Paris Agreement says we should aim towards keeping temperature at 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, or less than something below 2 at the upper level. Now, when they mention pre-industrial level, it means that something happened at that moment. And in fact, if you look at the chart of carbon in the atmosphere, it's shot up for the moment the world started depending so much on fossil fuels. And it's been going up within about less than 200 years. That a lot of this carbon has been pumped into the atmosphere. And that is why it was very shocking that despite all the negotiations, in fact, the night before the final plenary, many of the polluting countries had agreed that fossil fuels should be phased out. But when they got to the hall, the plenary session, they couldn't stick to that because some countries threatened to bungle everything. And so you can see a lot of arm twisting, a lot of blackmail going on, this kind of negotiation. And so at the end, all we came out with was the same language that was in the Glasgow Pact of COP26, which said that unabated coal should be phased down. Two things there. Phased down, not phased out. Very funny terminology. It's like they're going there to write drama, to be wordsmiths, trying to find new terminologies to hide what they ought to be doing. So phased down of unabated means that you can keep on using coal, but there must be a mechanism to show that the carbon emission is being collected or abated somehow. So that is the one that doesn't have the mechanism is the one you are going to face down. The one that has the mechanism that somebody says is going to take care of the problem, then you can keep on using coal. And that is what also caused the problem in that Article 6.4, the Paris Agreement, about carbon removal. Because everything suggested there was pointing to climate engineering or geoengineering, which is risky, unproven, and may have more adverse effect on poor countries or nations who would not have control over what is done with the climate. It's like giving over to rich nations or rich corporations the right to manipulate and control the climate of the planet.
So between Paris and Egypt, would you say there has been some progress made or none at all?
Well, the only progress made, as far as I can see, some of us see, is the loss and damage clause that has been idea that is now on the table for discussion for the very first time. But from Paris till date, the conference has refused to acknowledge the fact that the key thing to do to halt global warming or to tackle it and reduce it is to stop dependence on fossil fuels, oil, coal, and gas. They refused from the beginning to now, they refused to mention it. And why? Because like in the COP at Egypt, there were about 630 delegates from the fossil fuel industry. That is bigger than the biggest delegation from any country from Africa. 630 delegates from a sector, and some of them were sitting as negotiators representing countries, not representing themselves as oil companies or gas, representing countries, including African countries. So you have people right there in the hall whose job is to ensure that their own business is protected. So you have business, short-term business profit, be overriding the overall survival of the planet, of human beings on the planet, which is really shocking. And so for the COP to make progress, these polluters have to be kept out of the COP. As long as they remain in there, there will be very little room for progress to be made.
How easy would that be, or how difficult will that be to keep the polluters out of COP?
It's very difficult indeed, because the COP, the United Nations, is funded by donations from countries and from corporations. And many countries are not contributing as much as they ought to contribute. So as long as the UN is not funded independently, this kind of challenge will keep on occurring.
So the polluters are the ones funding the UN, and by implication, even funding the COP itself.
The polluters clearly stay. I mean, I don't want to mention names. I know you wouldn't mind if I do, but just out of being polite, I don't want to mention some companies. The major funders of the COP have been people, corporations whose businesses are complicit in the problem we're having.
The other aspect of it is how much unity, so to say, did Africa go with to COP27? Was there any concerted effort pre-COP to go with a unified front?
Well,
now, I ask that question against the backdrop of the fact that you said that even representative of countries at COP were actually working for some of the polluting companies.
Well, the issue again, Africa is in a very contradictory position because our leaders have refused to accept the fact that we have to shift away from fossil fuels. And so they are totally in bed with fossil fuel companies. So that doesn't affect their unity was one, that Africa has a right to keep on using fossil fuels. And number two, Africa should have sufficient finance to tackle global warming. I think those are the two major planks that went there. So they were totally united. They are completely united. And so this is a dilemma for some of us who are observing, representing communities, who see that the fact that the global north use fossil fuels to develop does not mean that we must go the same way. Just like, in a very simple terms, the fact that others had telephones with all the telephone lines to communicate doesn't mean that we couldn't jump onto mobile telephone system. But again, the argument of African countries is that, and they are right to make this argument, really. In terms of justice, climate justice, which is the foundation of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, even though now climate justice in the various documents are now in quotes, signifying that they don't all agree what it means, or that it doesn't have the same meaning for everyone. And so African nations are insisting that they have a right to utilize fossil fuels to provide energy, to meet the energy shortage on the continent. But you see, we can say that in a conference of that nature. But when we come back home, let's look at it. Nigeria has been extracting oil for 64 years now. Now, has that reduced the electrical power shortage in Nigeria? No, it hasn't.
Or has it increased?
No, well, are things getting better in terms of energy supply because we've been extracting for 64 years? No. So if you extract oil for another 60 years, why would it be different? So the only argument our politicians can have is that, look, we need this resource to get foreign exchange. And so now, the issue is not whether you are extracting at one level, is not whether you keep on extracting the resource, is what do you do with the funding that comes from that resource. Take Nigeria, for example. I just heard the central bank governor saying that the NNPC has remitted $0 to the national account. Now, if a company that says it's making profit and has money to look for oil in new fields remits nothing to the national purse, of what use is for it to even look for resources anywhere? I mean, to look for oil or gas anywhere else? Because you are profitable, but you are not contributing anything to the national purse, and we're depending on that to provide energy for the nation, I think we've got a lot of thinking to do.
We are not just depending on that to provide energy for the nation, but depending on it for national development generally.
Yes, and the issue that we have, a lot of governments in Africa have to sit down and talk about what is development. We need to define what development is. If we say that development is to be like some countries and what they've done has brought the world to the brink of disaster, and you want to be like that, then that is wrong thinking. We need to, I think Africa is in a position to redefine what development is and let the world learn from us what it really means. And development, if you go to our culture, a man or woman that is well-to-do is somebody who has good relationship with the neighbors and with nature. That's not somebody who accumulates all the wealth to himself and all the power to himself. That is not someone who gains respect in the community.
Now, let me bring you back to the loss and damage deal, because it appears, and this is very correct, that the framework for that deal has not been properly knocked out.
Not at all.
Now, what is going to happen moving forward before the next COP? Is there a possibility that this framework will be ironed out? Is there a possibility that there will be a midterm review of what has happened in Egypt to say, okay, this is the direction we want to go. This is what each of these industrialized countries is going to contribute to the loss and damage fund, and these are the countries of the South that will benefit using XYZ parameters.
You know, one of the arguments also on this issue is that who are the developing countries? Who are the countries that will benefit? And some people are arguing that China should not be part of it. China in the United Nations system is classified as a developing country. And of course, they work in the same block with Africa when they go for climate negotiation. So now you're going to have the first argument. Take China out. They are not really developing countries. They are one of the top polluters. Yes. And they are also fairly advanced in terms of industrialization. So that would be a big debate. That can be a big distraction also. But of course, there will be an intersessional midterm for review. But if you look closely at the way the system has been crawling, imagine some clauses in the Paris Agreement agreed so many years ago are still being debated today and not concluded. So would the loss and damage, whatever agreement, suddenly come into effect at the next COP? That would be a wonderful miracle.
In other words, we've just been, well, will I say, the industrialized countries of the world merely agreed to the pressure from the global south. Okay, you want loss and damage fund, we agree to it, but of course, going back to what happened in 2009 at Copenhagen up till now, it just simply means that it's another, well, how would I put it? Is another fraud?
Well, let's say that from records, as you mentioned, going back to Copenhagen in 2009, the Copenhagen Accord was that from that year to 2020, rich countries will contribute $10 billion a year. Then from 2020, they'll ramp it up. That was the language, ramp it up to $100 billion a year to help vulnerable countries. Since then, that target has never been met. The target of either 10 billion or 100 billion, never met. But there's been struggle to count all kinds of funding as part of that, instead of bringing money as an additionalities to help the poor countries. But, you know, with regard to loss and damage, I think we could also give some benefit of doubt. Because there are some countries, some rich countries who have already put money down towards loss and damage. I mean, it's not significant, but some millions of dollars are already on the table towards payment of loss and damage. But before anybody could access that money, and before, what we need is multiple of billions, not millions. So that still needs to be hammered out. And how would this run? Would it run parallel to the Green Climate Fund? Or would there be separate tracks? And are you going to close one down for the other? There are a lot of considerations which I'm sure they're going to have very intense negotiations when they get together. And this is why it's time now to begin to prepare the various scenarios and also plan the argument for each one, because the recognition of the historical debt is extremely fundamental. The UN framework itself is based on one of the key principles is the common but differentiated responsibilities and differing capacities. Now, when you say common but differentiated capacity responsibilities, it means that there are people who are more responsible than the other, and there are people who have more capacity than the other in terms of tackling that problem. And this is climate justice basis, that those who have created the problem should do their fair share. The Paris Agreement said everybody should do it as they see fit, and that's why everybody signed it. But now we've signed it, but it's time to go back to the drawing board and say, look, we can't just open this to everybody to do whatever they feel like. Some countries are planning to cut emissions they don't even generate, because they have to submit a document every year to say this is what we're going to do. I mean, like you said initially, the African countries have not contributed significantly to the store of carbon in the atmosphere. Even all the fossil fuels we are generating in Africa, we are producing in Africa, most of the fossil fuels are for export. 89% of the infrastructure for liquefied natural gas on the continent are built for export. 89% for export. So you can say we're going to generate, we're going to produce to help ourselves, all for export. We're not even burning the fossil fuels here. We are aiding the polluters to burn more by giving them the raw materials. These are things we have to look at. How do we move forward? We can't be export dependent all the time. Always talk about foreign direct investment. Always talk about foreign exchange. What are we doing internally?
All right, let's take a short break. When we come back, we will be looking at that. What are we doing internally? After the COP27 conference, Nigeria, as a country, participated in that conference. Shouldn't we be doing some stock taking and planning the next line of action? Stay with us.
Here is a new and refreshing offer for our esteemed audience across the globe. The new AIT Cloud TV is an online streaming service that offers you attractive opportunities to view our rich, exciting, and entertaining programs anytime, anywhere. AIT Cloud TV is available on the web on www.ait.app, Apple TV, Amazon Fire TV, Roku, and Android TV. You can also download the mobile app from the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store. Simply connect to the internet, download the app, register, and watch live or catch up on unlimited hours of exciting shows. AIT Cloud TV. TV on the go.
All right, thank you so much for staying with us. Now, you said it. Let's bring this back home. Let's bring it back to Nigeria after COP. The expectation is that those who represented Nigeria at every level, from governmental to civil society, should sit down and do some stock taking and plan the next line of action. Is that expected to happen? And what are those cardinal and key issues that they should be looking at in terms of the agreements are reached and the things that were not achieved at COP27?
Right. Well, I think since after the COP, a number of civil society groups have been doing stock taking and debriefing and trying to make sense of what happened at Sharm el-Sheikh. I think, as rightly suggested, there should also be an interface between the various actors in the country to look at what did we take to the COP, what were the arguments, and what did we come up with, and where are we going, and what are we likely going to get from the next negotiations. It has been an annual ritual. Should it just be a ritual, or should it be a ritual, or should it be something that is definitive, like the Soccer World Cup, that you have to have a solution at the end. So there's some of the things we need to look at. Includes national determined contributions, the NDCs that we produced and submitted. How are we implementing those things we said we're going to do. Are we taking real climate action, or are we going to depend on the non-solutions that are so popular in the COP itself? The non-solution is carbon trading. People trading carbon is trading hot air, imaginary arithmetics that people use to make money, rather than stopping emissions. So what are we doing? What is our plan towards stopping emissions at source? For example, when are we going to stop gas flaring? Why should that go on one more day? The oil from Bauchi or Gombe, are they going to be flaring gas up there? What are we doing to take that dramatic, very visible action that will tell the world, yes, we are really doing something in this direction? And when is that going to happen? 2030? That's another deadline that we keep on hearing. I will be hearing deadlines since
I've heard so many deadlines.
Yeah, we've heard starting from 1984,
yes,
when the president was a military head of state. So we've had all these deadlines and nothing has happened, or nothing significant has happened. So that is one. What are we doing to protect our forest? We have the Great Green Wall project that cuts across the Saharan Africa, from Djibouti to Dakar. Now, a big chunk of it got through northern Nigeria. What kind of trees are we planting there? Are we planting native varieties? Are we seeing that as a zone of economic activities where people will be happy to protect those trees and make sure that they survive? Or are we planting exotic varieties? What are we doing about using indigenous knowledge available in our region to protect the environment? There are so many things we really need to look at. Flooding just happened in Nigeria. What is our response? Will the flooding happen again? Of course it's going to happen again. What is our preparation? Which dam are we building, or River Benue or wherever, to take care of the water that will come again from Cameroon or from anywhere else? So this is time to invest in real climate-proving our environment and our economy.
Now, when you talk about investment in the environment, it looks abstract. It sounds abstract. What is the obligation and responsibility of critical stakeholders, beginning with government in this area? What is the responsibility of the ordinary Nigerian who, as it were, particularly those in rural areas, who are the ones who are impacted most by climate change?
Yes. Well, I think a big chunk of the responsibilities on government and governments across the world, because they're the ones who control the resources and they're the ones who have the capacity and the platform to get things done at a global or national level. Because this is not something you do piecemeal. You have to have a plan that connects the dots so that you see what you want to see at the end of the day. So things like, how do we generate electricity? Many communities in Nigeria today, they are not served by the national grid. And the national grid will be too expensive to expand to all, look at every corner. Look at of this nation, or any nation at all. Unfortunately, we have the renewable energy option, solar power, that you can have independent systems. If the most remote communities can have this. And so that's where the investment should be, both by government and by private sector. If private sector puts on a power supply system in a community people, to the best of their ability, will be willing to pay and get the energy supply to them that will boost their local economy. And then apart from that, we need more robust infrastructure. If you're building the East-West Road from Warri to Calabar, and you see that there are a lot of areas that gets flooded very easily, and you have to construct the road in a way that flooding will not destroy the road. The way that the road itself is alive, is breathing, has capacity to take the water and take it where it ought to go. That's something that government can do, not individuals. Then for individuals, we have to, that things is mostly about consumption. For example, a Nigerian will go to the market, is going to buy a loaf of bread. The loaf of bread is inside a polythene, it's inside plastic. And then the person will insist on getting a plastic bag, a single-use plastic bag, to put a loaf of bread that's already inside a plastic. And then you find these plastics everywhere, littering all our streets, littering the highways, especially when you have checkpoints or passports where traders gather to sell things. So you have this massive pollution. They all end up in the ocean. They end up in our drainage system, end up in the streams and rivers, and go to the ocean. We're creating serious problems. This is creating, this is also contributing to the problem we have, problems of flooding, because drainage channels get blocked by various waste items. And so the individuals have a duty to reject single-use plastic bags. Everybody can have.
Some countries have actually banned the use.
Some
African countries.
Oh yeah, many.
Uganda
many
is one, for instance.
Yeah, which country?
Uganda.
Exactly. South Sudan. You can't use single-use plastic in South Sudan. These are countries that we have much more resources than, and we could. So you see, there's a policy deficit here, because I think people in power don't want to offend those who are producing. It's big business produce single-use plastic. Before you even use the bag, it's torn, and you throw it away, you get another one. But the makers are making money, and you are destroying the environment, killing wildlife and killing even domestic animals who may swallow or eat up this plastic. So it's something to, if we know that we have a critical problem before us, we have to be serious about the action that we take.
Now, let me bring you back to the issue of loss and damage. There are those who have argued since after the conference that this might just, the agreement might just embolden the industrialized rich countries of the world to carry on more pollution. Is that a possibility? I mean, I'm giving you the poor countries of the South this much. And I need to generate that amount that I'm giving to you. And the only way I can do it is to continue or even heighten the pollution that is already on.
Well, it's like somebody said, because I've given you something, then my conscience is clear. I could, kind of, that would certainly happen. That would be part of the thinking. Because if actually you're begging for assistance, you don't really have a very strong basis to demand for strong action. This is why the issue of liability is important. That's why Nigeria should be one of the countries championing the acceptance of the ecocide as a crime before the International Criminal Court. Ecocide being massive destruction of the environment. People, those who do that, should pay for it. They should be brought before the International Court of Justice, just like those who cause genocide or war crimes or unusual crimes, should be held to account. So if it's possible that some countries could do that, because even now, through carbon trading, which some countries believe is, or if countries and companies believe they believe is a climate action. So somebody says, okay, I'm polluting, but I'm paying someone else not to pollute, therefore everything is okay. Therefore we have net zero. I pollute, you don't pollute, or we bring the arithmetic together and we have net zero. That doesn't really help, but it helps the polluter to keep polluting. Once somebody can pay you to forget about what he's doing, then that's an incentive for the person to keep doing what they're doing. So if loss and damage is taken as charity, of course it's going to embolden the polluter to continue polluting. And these polluters are very shifty. See the war, Russian war against Ukraine, suddenly involved shutting off the gas supply from Russia, and now they're all looking at Africa. They say dash for cash in Africa, dash for gas in Africa. In almost all the sensitive locations you can think of. The Salom Delta in Senegal, the Niger Delta, a new pipeline to go to Morocco, not for Africa, to ship to Europe. The oil from Uganda is going to Tanzania. Why? For Tanzanians? No. To ship out of the continent. The gas in Mozambique is already causing serious conflict. Now we have South African soldiers, Rwanda soldiers, they're fighting to keep the place peaceful, to secure the infrastructure for what? For export. So as long as the polluters can always come here to grab our natural resources, and we always say, oh, give us something in return, or help us to do this or to adapt or do this and that, then it's a no-win situation.
That again brings us back to the issue of fossil fuels. Now, some people will say, look, at COP27, it was a positive for the oil-producing poor African countries, poor developing countries. But others will say, no, shouldn't we have gone in another direction as far as fossil fuel is concerned? Now, if you look at these two scenarios, and look at, say, in the next 10 years, is there a possible, since the industrialized countries of the world, as it were, still depend on gas and fossil fuels from the global south, is there a possibility that, I say, in the next 10 years, 20 years, that this would come up for review at any of the COP meetings?
Well, I think in the next COP, they may agree, the next few COP or the one after, they will agree that fossil fuels should be phased out. They almost agreed at the COP in El Shamsi, but the issue is, would they phase it out? And that's a real challenge. Would they actually phase it out? Or would they find ways to say this is going to be abated? You are going to remove the carbon. Those who are designing the infrastructure, the technology for grabbing carbon, they are putting a lot of money into that, and they don't want to lose their money. So, and the argument, they have the argument in the book that there's carbon removal. There's no way you can tackle global warming without removing the carbon. That is almost like a given. So how are you going to remove the carbon? Rather than saying, do agroecology, let the soil help us, stop using artificial fertilizers, stop destroying our soil through all kinds of things that we're doing. People are looking for mechanical means to take carbon out of the soil, rather than asking nature to help us do that. So that is going to be a problem going forward. And yes, the thing again is that the shock that Europe is experiencing right now, they may look, obviously they're coming to Africa to get the resources they can't get from Russia, but they also know that anything can happen at any time. So the investment in getting alternative energy will be heightened. It's strategic for them, so that they are not dependent on any region. So if we think that we're going to have the market for crude oil for 20 years, is wishful thinking. Even the oil found in Bauchi and Gombe will become stranded assets. You have it, nobody will need it at a point in time and in our lifetime. And other countries have stopped producing internal combustion engine, for example. And some people are saying, well, it's not only petrol or fuel that we make from petroleum resources, but people are also finding alternative ways of making the same materials that you're making from petroleum. So the wisdom
entire
for
value chain.
This petroleum civilization is winding down, and we have to realize that. It's only about less than 200 years old. It's not been here for eternity. It came and it's gone.
All right. Well, maybe I should throw this in as a last question, which is that after COP27, we're now looking at, say, COP28. What are we designing? And when I say we, African countries, developing countries, those that are feeling the impact of the climate change more than all the others. The polluters know, they already know where they are, but the developing countries are the ones who are hardest hit and all of that. What should be the progressive agenda towards COP28?
Well, first of all, is for all vulnerable nations. In fact, every nation in the world they have to sit down to examine what has gone on scientifically, without sentiments. We have to look at what has happened, in which direction is the COP moving. And each country must decide to have experts on this negotiating lineup. You don't pick people there just because they happen to have connections or because they have some special interest and they promise you they can defend you. We have to look at our real interests. Get the experts there. Get people with history who have an idea what happens at the COP, how the negotiations are carried out, where the rooms are, where the real deals are being made. So that you don't go, if somebody could go to the COP and you spend 2 weeks, you won't even know what is going on. You're only seeing the outcomes. But people are deciding.
Just be parading the corridors.
And maybe shopping at the extra time, wherever you have the time. Next COP is in Dubai. So you can imagine that a lot of people may be distracted, thinking that they're there for vacation. So we really need to look down, what are the problems? Look at what is our capacity and what are the deficiencies that we have. How do we make up for those deficiencies? And what are the strongest demands we can make at the COP? How can we utilize the Common but Differentiated Responsibilities clause, for example, to demand for payment of climate debt? How can we make the loss and damage not to not become charity by any means, but to be a definitive acknowledgement of liability and the fact that somebody's being owed. Now, we have to be more political when we go to the COPs. If we just go there, or this is what came out, this is the draft that we're going to debate, and you're going to debate it on the surface, you would never get anything beneficial to for our people or environment.
So is it advisable, for instance, to say from now on, have bilateral, multilateral, and diplomatic channels to reach out to these countries and to these delegates before the conference itself?
You're asking me a difficulty because you are much into discussion about politics. You're asking me this difficult question. Well, you may not know the first 11 that any country is going to provide. But I know at political level, of course, I know in Africa, the Ministers of Environment always meet. So they must continue to look at what is going on and look at the best interests of the continent and agree on what to do. I find like-minded countries, of course, and build commonalities on what positions to take to the COP.
Mm. All right, thank you so much, Mr. Nnimmo Bassey. He is a renowned environmentalist and activist. Of course, he was at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt and has shared his experiences and views on the agreements that were reached and the issues that were discussed and even those that fell by the wayside. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
For finding time to join us.
Thanks a lot.
All right. That's our program for today. Thank you for investing your time with us. We'll see you again when we bring you a fresh edition of the program. Bye for now.